Hello and welcome to this special live transmission regarding this particular day back in 2014 when over 140 innocent souls lost their lives at the hands of the terrorists. I'm Jawad Tehami and we'll be delving deeper into as to what led to that particular massacre of so many innocent school children and what that particular incident led where in terms of the national consensus is concerned, that national action plan, that national resolve to eliminate this particular menace of terrorism is concerned. There are certain very important statements which have been made by both the President and the Prime Minister. Let me talk firstly about the statement by President Asif Ali Zardari. He has expressed nation's determination to root out the remains of terrorism and extremism from Pakistan. December 16 reminded the nation to get united against terrorism and increase efforts to eliminate this menace. When we specifically talk about the statement coming from Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, he has said, let me quote, "The entire nation was standing as a wall of fortified steel against the covert terrorists and would not forget the incident. Our heart is still in grief and we are shedding tears of blood. No amount of time can erase the trauma of the children who witnessed the unfathomable horrors on that day, nor can it ease the grief and suffering of the families who lost their loved ones," unquote. As I've already mentioned, that after this particular horrific massacre of innocent lives over there in APS on 16th of December 2014, the entire nation had that particular consensus that manifested in National Action Plan, a 20-point agenda to do away with this particular menace once for all. And what has happened over the last 10 years? What had been the progress? Pakistan happened to be the only country in the world that not only actually broke the backbone of this particular menace, but also drove all such elements away from this sacred homeland. But unfortunately, we saw back in 2021 when the international troops withdrew from Afghanistan, from that war-ravaged country, the Taliban took over power. They took over the presidential palace in Kabul, and they also had the international commitment in an international instrument that is known the world over as the Doha Peace Accord, that they won't allow the Afghan soil to be used for terrorist activities by any of the insurgents or terrorist groups. But it's been more than 3 years now that the world still awaits the fulfillment of that international obligation on the part of the interim de facto authorities there in Afghanistan, which are, of course, the Afghan Taliban. Not only this, in the recent past, we have seen multiple reports by the United Nations that there is a strong evidence of collaboration between the de facto authorities in Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban, and also those terrorist groups which have the Afghan soil as a safe haven over there. Not only that, those terrorist groups are also having the access to the leftover advanced weapons, the NATO caliber weapons, which have been used in perpetrating heinous terrorist activities over here in Pakistan. And Pakistani authorities have been conveying to the interim Afghan authorities that you have to fulfill the international obligation, and to an extent, the Pakistani authorities even went to an extent of offering assistance, even if the Afghan authorities need that in order to take a decisive and a concrete action against such elements. But unfortunately, there has been a pattern of denial on the part of the interim Afghan authorities. At this particular moment, when these statements show that the entire nation is still in that particular grief of having lost so many innocent lives on that particular fateful day, this resurgence of terrorism, what needs to be done? We know for a fact, in the recent past, Pakistani authorities came up with Azm-e-Istehkam, that resolve to bring stability in the country. Despite conveying so many times to the interim Afghan authorities, there hasn't been an action by them. We've been listening to all the analysts. They've been talk of, getting in touch with the interim Afghan authorities on diplomatic front in order to impress upon them to fulfill their international obligation. But what are the other options? How can the interim Afghan authorities be impressed upon that they need to fulfill their international obligation, and how this particular resolve to stability, azm istehkam, that is faring so far? To discuss all this, we are honored to be joined in the studio by Mr. Saif Jamshaid Baryar, senior analyst. Mr. Baryar, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to be joined by Brigadier retired Masud Ahmed Khan, senior analyst. Brigadier Khan, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. On the phone line, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Mushtaq Yousafzai, senior journalist. Mr. Yousafzai, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on this special live transmission regarding this particular day. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Baryar. This very day reminds us of that particular incident. Nobody would ever forget that massacre, that innocent children lost their lives at the hands of the terrorists. What are your feelings 10 years down the lane today?
First of all, Jawad, thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure to be on the national television. But for the first time in the past 2 years, today I am in sorrow to be voiceful. I am in sadness to be voiceful, because still after 10 years, those memories live, and we will not forgive and we will not forget. But to be here means to be more stronger. To be here means to be more resilient. To be here means that maybe these 250 million people have decided not to give up. And to be very honest, I think the ticker was playing before we just began. And still those memories are fresh. To see those children who are not amongst us anymore, they would have lived very good lives as young, dynamic individuals. To see those mothers, I think the grief stays, but the hope still remains that despite, no matter what the world has said to us, despite losing 70,000 lives in war against terrorism, despite battling this menace in the past 40 years in a very resilient fashion, despite losing an economic gain worth more than $200 billion, my country stands tall. And today, with my country standing tall, we are becoming more aware and educated of a globalized world. And we have given an imagery after 2016 to the world that if we will take revenge against someone, it will be revenge with education. It will be revenge with resilience. It will be revenge against war by making peace. And that is what Pakistan has been standing for in the last 1 decade. I still very much so very clearly remember that day when those children were returning back in ambulances. I think that perhaps is the darkest day in the history of Pakistan. And that darkest day makes us all collective in one fashion, that no matter what, we will not give up on the lives we lost. And we will make sure that Pakistan bounces back economically, inshallah we will, and we are. We will make sure that we secure not only the economic frontiers of this country, but we secure the borders of this country as well. And for that, we need the international community to understand that it is not something of a game in which Pakistan is to play alone. The international actors, our neighbors, they all have to play a role. And specifically so after 2021, we've been seeing a resurgence of incidents in Pakistan, and specifically so in the past 6 months. A belt that has been across the border and adjoining districts, for example, Lucky Marbat and DI Khan, and specifically so Balochistan, and all the elements that have been interfering in trying to destabilize Pakistan must get this image very clear today on 16th December 2024, 10 years after, that today we are still standing tall and we'll continue to stand tall. And it's not simply more than 140 families who lost beautiful souls that day. It was a nation of 250 million people that lost those beautiful souls, and we will never give up. And the best revenge, I think, is education. The best revenge is economic progress. The best revenge is securing our political borders as well, and securing our economic frontiers as well. And today the world knows that Pakistan has been standing on the right side of history. No matter what the world says, But yes, I will take this moment to appreciate the roles that our security forces are playing. The role that every person is playing in the development of this country, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a student, whether it's a security personnel, whether it's an educationalist like me, or it's an analyst like me, or whether it's you sitting over there trying to still make sure that that cause doesn't die. I think there's a lot to hope for, and there's a lot to look after.
There are lots of points, other points to be talked about. Mr. Baryar, I'll come back to you. Let me bring in Brigadier Khan to the discussion. 10 years down the lane, as Mr. Baryar is of the view, Pakistan stands taller. With that particular hope, with that particular resolve, despite so many challenges in the last 10 years on this particular front, what are your feelings today as we remember the supreme sacrifice of those innocent souls back there in APS?
Thank you very much, Jawad. Certainly, 16th December is the darkest chapter as far as Pakistan history is concerned, and we cannot forget that bloodbath and that devastated the entire nation. That has left an emotional scar of the entire across the country, when 147 innocent people, including 132 children, they were martyred by the terrorists when they attacked and they stormed the Army Public School. So that was one factor which united the entire nation. After that, we went for national action plan, and subsequently then we speeded up the operation Zarbada, which was already in progress at that time. There were basically 27 individuals who were involved in the attack at APS. 6 were they were tried in the military court and they were hanged. And the mastermind of this attack was Umar Mansoor, known as Umar Nare. He was killed in Afghanistan in a drone attack. And interestingly, the Indian hand behind this entire episode we cannot forget. There was one Indian who was sitting in Jalalabad named as Angora. He was in contact with this Umar Nare throughout the attack at APS. So that was established the Indian involvement in the APS attack. And Pakistan, when they deposited a dossier at United Nations Security Council, so we named 4 individuals of their involvement in terrorism by violating 1267 United Nations Security Council resolution, which says individuals involved in financing terrorism and providing material support. So there were 4. One, this Angora was actually, he was involved in the APS attacks. So that is how these proxies are being used against Pakistan. Today, there are some powers, they are using Afghanistan as well as Fitna al-Kharij as the proxies against Pakistan. So at the same time, the Afghan interim government, they are also using these Fitna al-Kharij against Pakistan for their ulterior motives inside Pakistan. So we have provided over a period of time for their involvement in Pakistan terrorist activities. Now, after, as we were discussing, after 2021, where Afghan Taliban took over, in 2021 there were 49 attacks in Pakistan. So there was a reduction in terrorist activities by 86%. So with the takeover of Afghan Taliban and after the US withdrawal, so we saw a rise, a spike in terrorist attacks. That was because those who were in prisons, they were released. They were provided with the hideouts, weapons especially, the latest weapons, and today they have an advantage. The Fitna al-Kharij, they carry laser fitted weapons, and then the night vision goggles, and at the snipers, they have this advantage. You know, they operate at night and they can use the sniper extra. So, and then they are providing logistic supports, financial supports, and they have given this Fitna al-Kharij liberty to move inside Afghanistan. They are breaching our fence, and their basics. So if they are breaching, so they are doing it by design the Afghan and facilitating the entry of these Fitna Kharij inside Pakistan. And we have seen the involvement of Afghan Taliban right from them they attacked the post at Chatral. That was a joint attack by Al-Qaeda and the TTP and Afghan army. So Pakistan has over a period of time has provided the international community. International community has endorsed the Pakistan stance. This was done several times by, more recently by the analytics support and section monitoring team. They endorse this. They are operating from Afghanistan. There is a hideout. Not only these Fitna Kharij, but they also mention Majid Brigade and BLA. The General Kurela, the CENTCOM chief, he has number of time he has said they are operating from Afghanistan. Tom West, the special envoy on Afghanistan, United States, he has confirmed the Central Asian republics, and more recently during the summit at General Assembly.
So after so much confirmation as far as the analytic support and sanctions monitoring committee of the United Nations Security Council is concerned, there are a number of other reports by the United Nations which speak volume, not only of how Afghan soil is serving as a safe haven for all these terrorist groups, but also that collaboration and that help that is coming from the interim Afghan authorities. I'll come back to you. That brings us to question, if there is so much endorsement, and Pakistan being the front ally in the war on terror right at the outset, Pakistan sacrificed so much in terms of losing men and material, also so much losses to the economy as well. What is required of the international community at this particular moment? I mean, only these reports, only these endorsements, or do you expect any sort of practical help or assistance coming towards Pakistan? I'll come back to you regarding that. Now, Mr. Baryar, as far as the situation over there on Afghan soil is concerned, there was, of course, reduction in such type of acts with a lot of efforts put in, but since the Afghan Taliban have taken over, again we have seen the resurgence of terrorism. Now Pakistan has told the United Nations Security Council even today, let me quote, an official terrorism within and from Afghanistan poses the single most serious threat to the country, to the region and to the world. There is an international instrument that makes it an obligation on the part of the interim Afghan authorities that they won't allow this soil to be used for terrorist activities against any other country. Still, we are getting these sort of warnings at the United Nations Security Council. 3 years down the lane, why do you think the interim Afghan authorities have failed? Rather, they've been into a pattern of denial that such type of elements don't exist on the Afghan soil. Why is that so?
Jawad, there is a reason behind that. Well, the first thing to establish over here is that in the international relations spectrum, there is a framework of mechanism of conflict resolution and maintenance of international peace. And any country that's the member to the UN is certainly obligated by the Convention and the Covenant of the UNG. It is obligated by the covenants of the UNSC as well. Now, the only issue is that in the past 3 years since 2021, the very reason that there hasn't been a collective grand dialogue in Afghanistan, and these are the facts. Well, in 2021, there was a very shaky transition that did happen, and the end game that maybe the US was trying to achieve in Afghanistan did not really reach its logical conclusion. Now, if you look at the demographic dividends of Afghanistan, Afghanistan is not certainly comprised of one ethnicity. It is a multi-mix of many different ethnicities. It's a mix of the Afghans, it is a mix of Uzbeks, it's a mix of Tajiks, it's a mix of Central Asian people, and it is a mix of some people who have very close ethnic ties with the Baloch community as well. So the ultimate solution would be the ad hoc government, I'd call it, in Afghanistan right now, calling a grand dialogue. And a grand dialogue would maybe require a more democratic solution to the economic problems and obstacles.
By the way, that was one of the conditions in
that
Doha
was one of the conditions
also
in
formation of an
2021
inclusive
in Doha.
government.
That was one
but
of
they haven't gone down that line as well.
Absolutely. In fact, that
so
was
what are the fears they do have?
Jawad, that was the prerequisite
Yeah.
to attaining maybe a long-term solution that was aspired for Afghanistan back then, and it was something that all the stakeholders had pushed for, and there was a certain stipulated time period that they had to experience that transition. Now, one of the main reasons is that maybe the current Afghan interim government or the system of governance, I'd not really call it a government, I'd call it a system of ad hocism that is operating over there. They're not willing to collectivize the different ethnic fractions in Afghanistan.
To what purpose does it serve to them? Is there anything
There's
that they
a
get
purpose.
at the end of the day?
There is a purpose. The purpose from a very ethnic standpoint is that more than 42% of the people are reflected in the Afghan ethnicity by Afghanis purely. And that has been a legacy that they've continued for the past 2,000, 3,000 years. But they need to understand that ethno-dynamics or maybe dynamics of social dividends and demographics change over time, and that is what ultimately democracy wishes to resolve for people. So I think the only thing that is required of right now is maybe on the international front, pressure being asserted on this current setup in Afghanistan, that if you want to make it prosperous for your own country, and if you want to make it prosperous and safe for the country that is adjacent to you, us, you need to give a political solution. You would not really be requiring guns anymore when you've got the power of the pen.
When you talk of international community, international responsibility towards Pakistan, Pakistan has paid so much being the front line ally in the war on terror. Now, when this particular term is used in our discussions, international community, which international community we look forward to? Is it the Western international community? Is it the regional powers over here? Or is it the entire international community, perhaps under the umbrella of the largest organization in the world, that is the UN? Where should we actually are looking forward to?
I absolutely got your point, Jawad. The fact of the matter is that it is the mandate of the UN. I do understand. But then again, the UN is a collective of almost 193 countries right now. And 193 countries, how many of them are situated in this region?
Yeah.
So I think regional actors, more than anyone else, need to play a part. And in this region, I think it's Pakistan. It's a country that borders us. And it's another country that borders us, Iran. It's another country, Afghanistan itself. And then how can we forget about regional economies in mega powers like China? And we've got very good working mechanisms with them. We've got a very good working relationship with the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia as well. And ultimately, if a resolution has to be reached, I think the Middle Eastern side of the world has to be more vocal to this resolution, because the foundation or the premises of dialogue was established in Doha back then.
Right.
So I think we need to revive what we started back in 2021 in Doha.
What about the US?
I think the US has been, I'd take a moment to say that the US has been a bit complacent in establishing that transition that ultimately had to be a peaceful one. In 2021, it was vowed and it was promised by the US that a peaceful democratic transition would ultimately be reached, and the stipulated time period was anywhere between 12 months to 48 months, but that was never reached. So I think we need to make sure that the countries that were mediators back then, the countries that were the major stakeholders back then, and the countries that pushed stakeholders like Pakistan into resolving the solution need to play a very active part, because ultimately it's not about playing the part anymore. It's about looking at what country is suffering the most collateral out of this shaky and a volatile situation, and that unfortunately is my country. And I think the international community, the US, the UK, or all these communities and countries, or even those countries that were actively involved in NATO back then, they need to actively take a political stand at the UNGA.
Right. Let me take this point to Brigadier Khan. Lots of endorsements, lots of reports from the United Nations in the recent past of active collaboration between interim Afghan government and those terrorist outfits which are based over there and perpetrating such heinous acts against Pakistan, especially when we talk about Pakistan's red line, the TTP, the Fitna al-Khawarij. What's the responsibility we expect from the international community at this point in time?
Probably, and the importance of Afghanistan is now no more on the priority list of America as far as Americans or the Western countries are concerned, because their attention is now in Ukraine as well as in Middle East. So that's why they have relegated this importance of Afghanistan, despite the fact the rising power of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State of Khorasan, which they are operating from Afghanistan, and recently they have demonstrated their capability. And now let us recently know our special representative at United Nations Security Council, Usman Jadoon, said that there is a likely alliance, which is already we have reports between Al-Qaeda and TTP becoming a regional as well as an international threat. So that is one thing, and the Al-Qaeda, they have established their new bases in Afghanistan. As I said, they were part of those attack against incursion in Chatral, and they are also training. Abu Akhlas, one of the Al-Qaeda operators, he is training the suiciders in Kunar province. So now they have a link with not only with TTP, also with the BROS, the Baloch elements. So that is one thing. But as we highlighted, the responsibility now goes to the regional countries. And recently, couple of days back, the United Nations Security Council passed another resolution which they endorsed the continuity of the United Nations Analytic Support and Sanction Monitoring Team for another 1.5 years. And this was supported by not only by Chinese but also by the Russians. So that means the Russians and Chinese, they have the concern. And the resolution says there is a threat, the terrorists, they are operating from inside Afghanistan. They are threatening not only Pakistan but threatening the region. So that is the shift we have seen in the recent past, from the Chinese as well as the Russians. They are about to delist the Taliban from the terrorist list. At the same time, the Chinese, they have accepted Bilal Karimi as their ambassador, but they have taken a stand, a rightful stand, and that is they have endorsed the terror outfits they are operating from Afghanistan. And more recently, a couple of months back, when there was a summit in General Assembly, on the sidelines, Pakistan, Iran, China and Russia, the foreign ministers, they sat together, and then the declaration was that the terrors, the Fitna al-Kharij and the BROS, they are operating from Afghanistan, threatening Pakistan as well as the Chinese, Russians and the Iranis. So that is how the entire. But
Brigadier Khan, I understand your point well. When these immediate neighbors of Afghanistan have to deal with this particular threat, of course they have to come up with any sort of a strategy, and they are sitting together trying to work the things out, how the situation in Afghanistan could be brought back to normalcy, how Afghanistan could be brought into that particular circle of, economic and regional connectivity as well, so that the people over the last 2 decades, not 2 decades, in fact 4 decades, have been enduring so much of suffering. But what about the US? What about the US, who came over here with international troops from other NATO members as well? They remained over here for 20 years. I mean, were they successful in achieving what they aspired at that particular moment?
I think it is a great game going on inside Afghanistan. The Americans, they have frozen $9.5 billion of assets worth of the Afghans, and second,
those were frozen right immediately.
Yes,
at the
exactly.
takeover of
in addition, about $2.6 billion were paid through NGOs, INGOs, and the money was kept pouring in Afghanistan, dollars, and monthly they were about $40 to $50 million plus. It was the monthly which was poured inside Afghanistan. This SIGAR, the Special Inspector General for Reconstruction of Afghanistan, they have shown their serious concern for missing of millions of dollars. They don't know the whereabouts of the money, where that money has gone. So everybody is playing a game for their own interests. So that's why basically they don't want peace in Afghanistan, the powers. They want to contain China in Pakistan, so therefore they are also using these proxies against Pakistan. So that was whether there are Fitna al-Kharij operating in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or BROS in Balochistan. So the players, they are behind the scenes. So they are playing for their own interests. That we understand, but we have to protect our interests. That too with the regional countries, as highlighted, it is China, Russia, Central Asian republics, Iran and the Middle Eastern countries.
Right, Brigadier Khan, what about those NATO caliber weapons which were left over here, of which those terrorist outfits have got the hold of, and they are being used against Pakistan?
That is a very serious, that weapons worth $7.12 billion were left by the Americans. The stories were carried by the Foreign Policy magazine, the story was carried by Al Jazeera, story was carried by the Washington Post. So leaving aside them, the Pentagon said 3 lakh small arms were left, 26,000 heavy weapons were left, and 61,000 they said the vehicles were left. This was the Pentagon said, but the number is higher than that, those figures. Moreover, the Kandahar, the south area in Panjwai, south of Kandahar, there is a weapons market where you can get weapons. Today, the BROS, the Majid Brigade, the BLA, they are in possession of these weapons. As I said, this has given the capability to these fentanyl Khawarij to operate at night using the snipers. So that's a very serious development, and probably despite the fact Pakistan has highlighted number of times, but these weapons were left by design.
Do you expect any sort of accountability whenever, and I'm also curious to understand what usually happens when the international troops from a certain territory withdraw. Do they just leave their weapons
never,
like that?
Never. It is a sort of a protocol. When you leave the weapon, you destroy them.
Okay. So they were not
So
destroyed.
they were left.
Was it because of the hasty withdrawal?
Not
Or
because
was
of
there
hasty,
something-
it was by design, though withdrawal was hasty, but at the same time those were left at different pockets. Not It was not in Kabul, it was in Kandahar, it was in Bagram and elsewhere. So it was left by design, and there were people who were in contact with them. So these were and basically collected by the Taliban. And Taliban and Foreign Policy magazine carried the title story was
This particular
the
fact is-
Afghan Taliban, they have become arms traders,
Yeah.
and they are earning billions of dollars. So they have been doing it, and today they have equipped their proxies against Pakistan.
Right. Given this bitter reality, Mr. Baryar, what are the options? I mean, how to deal with this particular threat of the access of these NATO caliber weapons at the hands of these terrorists?
I think, Jawad, we need to realize that Pakistan has a very long porous border that it shares with Afghanistan. And please be minded that the economic cost of it will never be a collective fencing program. It will have to be a fencing program that the cost of which will have to be entirely taken upon by Pakistan. Currently, to be very honest, we are not in the position to do that. And one of the main reasons for our border with Afghanistan being a very well secured border right now through physical presence of personnel is only because a long-term fencing solution would take a lot of time. And then we also need to look at the economic dynamics of trade. There's a lot of trade that is happening through two major corridors into Afghanistan right now. And time again, whenever that situation escalates, the trade borders close down as well. And we also need to look at the collective history or the collective language or the collective norms and values that the communities from both ends of the border share. No, it's not really the problem of the ordinary people who are suffering at the hands of this war or the hands of this cross transfer of weapons. It's maybe certain elements that Brigadier Saab has pointed well towards too. I think ultimately a solution would be to economically not only but also politically guard the borders in such a way that at least in the next possible Doha Accord, we make Afghanistan sign in a convention that they need to build or need to at least begin with a border fencing program. And that should be a prerequisite to maybe trade corridors being opened up with Afghanistan, because please be minded, they are heavily reliant on the trade that is really happening. And to be very honest, a lot of commodities of the basic bread basket that are being consumed in Afghanistan, they're being exported from Pakistan. So it's not simply a relationship that can be made volatile from the Afghan end in such a way. They also need to think about the long-term sustainability of their own population. Even if you look at the possible potential of maybe future trade routes opening up with Central Asian republics and Pakistan coming into a sense of combined fashion of regional economic cooperation, Afghanistan needs to play an optimistic part rather than a pessimistic one. And if maybe the policy makers or if maybe the people who are calling the shots over there understand that the long-term gain would be ultimately a sustainable solution to the development problems of Afghanistan, and maybe for once giving that air of economic, social and cultural breathing to their own population, I think they'd be benefiting their own country first and us later on.
If they seriously think about that particular
Absolutely.
thing, Brigadier Khan, do you think they seriously think about the development and the prosperity of their own people? And do you think is it doable to impress upon them that they should be involved in border fencing as well from that side of the border?
I don't think so. They are not serious as far as the Afghan Taliban interim government is concerned. And we have recently seen there is a division between Kabul and Kandahar also, and recent assassination of one of their leaders. So it's also that has widened the gap between the two. And moreover, despite the fact, more recently, and when we raised number of times of these fitna Khawarij operating from Afghanistan, basically they demonstrated their ignorance, and they said there is nobody is operating from Afghanistan. Basically those they are inside Pakistan and etc. They are not sensitive, despite our sincerity right from 1947 and looking after Afghan refugees since 1979. We have been hosting Afghan refugees generously for the last for over 4 decades now. But despite that fact, they have become and confirmedly their ungrateful nation. Despite our sincerity, they are trying and using all the means available to destabilize Pakistan through these proxies. And even if you go to in the history and right from 1947, you see they have been opposing Pakistan admission to United Nations, and subsequently all this Pakhtunistan events in Balochistan, insurgencies, they have been actively supporting all these the terrorists. They have been in Afghanistan, and recently BLA Bashir Zaib is in Afghanistan, and there are reports he's in Kandahar. So this was confirmed by one Nasrullah who was captured while crossing into Quetta, probably it was in somewhere in Chaman area. So he confirmed he was facilitated and his entry into Chaman area by the BLA people, and he said that he was in communication with Bashir Zaib, who was in contact with the Fitna Khawarij commander Nur Wali. So that is how things are operating. So without any doubt, the Afghan interim government is fully involved in destabilizing Pakistan by all means.
Okay, so there are so many other aspects to be discussed, of course, but this particular IBO-based anti-terror drive, most recently launched by the Pakistani authorities, the Operation Azm-e-Istehkam, resolved to stability. How has it fared so far? We know the supreme sacrifices every day of the vigilant personnel of the security forces, the law enforcement agencies also through different IBOs. They are hunting down to eliminate the remnants of this particular menace. How is it faring so far?
This is evident from the fact recently from 9 December till 13 December, 43 terrorists they were killed. 18 were killed in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Lucky Marwat and Tonk and North Waziristan. 25 they were killed in Balochistan. It was Panjgur, Turbat and Dara Bukti areas. So that was a big success as far as these are concerned. No Pakistani is taking on these tashkils which are coming into Pakistan from Afghanistan. So accordingly they are being taken to task. Similarly, operations is ongoing operations is across Pakistan, mainly in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan with high intensity under the banner of Azm-e-Istehkam, and that is intelligence-based operation, no displacement, no sort of big operations, and it is intelligence-based specific operations. So it has been a success in the last couple of months.
Right, Mr. Baryar, how important and crucial unity from all walks of life, from all the sectors of, this national mainstream is required to make this particular operation resolve to stability, Azm-e-Istehkam, a success, and to get done away with this particular menace once for all?
Jawad Saab, I'd rather say that the solution would always be a macro one and a macro sociological one before it becomes a macro political one, before it becomes a macroeconomic one. When a child is fostered or is socialized in an atmosphere where he sees guns and bullets, where a child sees up getting people killed, now what sort of a child will he become when he grows up to be an elder in his community? And that is unfortunately the dilemma of the children of Afghanistan right now. It's the dilemma of every war-torn country, every conflict zone. Now when it comes to Pakistan, I think the very first thing is that the last thing Pakistan can afford right now is internal political instability. That's the first thing that calls for a grand political dialogue like 2016, that no matter what our political differences are, they'll continue. That is how the democratic prospect is, and that is the beauty and the essence of democracy. We can differ, but we can differ within legal and parliamentary bounds, within the bounds of the Constitution. But that should never overwhelm us to an extent that ultimately we forget incidents like 2016. I think a grand political dialogue between all the political stakeholders is once again required to give that sense of seriousness to the ordinary civilians out there. You know, it's not really a safe atmosphere for a person who's spending his life in districts like Lucky Marwat, districts like D.I. Khan, like Brigadier Saab said, districts like Balochistan, districts like Turbat and Panjgur and etc. And even so, any country requires more than anything else that sense of social optimism that when I'm going out to live my life, when I'm going out to the office, I'm coming out to the program, I'm feeling safe and I'm feeling secure.
Point very well made. Mr. Saif Jamshaid Baryar, senior analyst, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on this special live transmission. Also in the studio, we were joined by Brigadier retired Masud Ahmed Khan, senior analyst. Brigadier Khan, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on this special live transmission. With that, we come to the end of this special live transmission. Until the next one, take good care of yourselves.